Hello there. I've thought about making this video for a while, and one of the reasons I took so long to do it was because I forgot how much Terry Goodkind sucked. And then I was doing research for this and I was reminded of it. So instead of doing a kind of reason to read these books or a review of the series, I'm just going to talk about the whole series. Let's tell the story of the 12-book series. I'm not talking about the later ones because I didn't read them. I had stopped caring at that point. And I just want to talk about how weird this series is, how derivative the series is, and this is just Ayn Rand fueled objectivist propaganda, and it's kind of funny. Now, this is coming from someone who has read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead and Anthem. His favorite books are his books that he's written, but if he has to pick one that's not his book, then he would pick Anthem by Ayn Rand, which whatever, dude. So let's get into this. The Sword of Truth series is set in a world divided into two regions. You've got the New World and the Old World. The New World is Europe, the Old World is Asia. That's the easiest way to look at it. Now, in the New World, it is divided into three sections. You ready for this? Very original names. We've got the Westland, which is in the west. In the east, we have Dahara. Okay, that name's all right. And then, you ready for it? The Midlands. Guess where they are? They're in the middle. And they are separated by these magical barriers. And these magical barriers were put up 20 years ago. One of the reasons why the Westland is separated is they don't want anything to do with magic. So there's no magic here. They're just like woods living bumpkins or whatever. Honestly, you don't know anything about the Westlands. I just realized that as I'm saying this. There's literally like a small town where the main character Richard lives and his brother lives. And then outside of that is his like mentor, and their dad is dead. And there is no discussion of the larger government for an entire like nation state or region. So that's really weird. You're going to find out as we go through this. Not only is this series very derivative, there's a lot of gaps that are nonsensical, but let's get into it. So Wizard's First Rule starts with Richard Cypher, whose father is dead and he's still in mourning a little, and he's a ranger, goes through the woods and does whatever dudes in the woods do when it's their job. But somehow he's also hyper competent with everything he touches. And if that sounds familiar, then guess what? You figured it out. It's an Ayn Rand main character. And so anyways, this mysterious woman shows up. Her name is Kaylin, and the whole story is about these two characters. I might accidentally call her Kalan because that's how I thought it was pronounced when I was 13 when I started reading the series. This story is about Kaylin looking for someone to help her stop Darkenrall. Yes, the bad guy's name is Darken. And what ends up happening is Richard helps her. He ends up being given this sword, the Sword of Truth, and it's a magical sword. It makes you a better fighter, blah, blah, blah. And as they go along, there's this weird vibe between them that's like sexual tension, but Kaylin won't tell Richard her past, and so there's like this weird thing going on between them. And anyways, let's just jump to the stuff that really matters in this. Toward the last third of the book, Richard gets kidnapped by the bad guy Darkenrall and is subjected to BDSM torture by leather mommies. I'm not joking. And at one point, he kicks a young teenage girl in the jaw and shatters all her teeth and severs her tongue and breaks her jaw because she's a bad person. Anyways, the whole BDSM torture ends up giving him some sort of superpowers, allows him to endure pain, and he tortures the one overweight leather mommy with her little torture tool. And then the end of the book is basically Kaylin using her powers that I forgot to talk about. She is a confessor, and what she can do is release her power on someone and turn them into a slave. So that's cool. Well, she uses it on Richard, and it doesn't work because her power is the power of love, and he loves her too much for it to affect her. And so then there's this whole Deus Ex Machina because Richard somehow has memorized a 200-page book of magic that he didn't understand, but somehow managed to keep it in his brain all these years. He shows Darkenrall how to unlock this magical box, but he lies because Darkenrall thought that he was under the power of Kaylin, and basically it kills Darkenrall, and then everything's fine. Except then we go into book 2, Stone of Tears, that starts off with, oh look, everything is not fine. Because you convinced Darkenrall to do that magical thing incorrectly, you tore a hole in reality, and now demons or other things from the other side are coming out. At one point, there's this little like weird monster thing at the beginning of the book, and Zed, who I forgot to mention, is a wizard and is Richard's grandpa, but was his mentor and lied to Richard for the his entire life, deals with that monster because now Richard knows that he is the son of Darkenral. Yeah, that happened too. And so he is going to be taking over the country of Dahara, maybe. And for now, Zed is like the second in command of Dahara, whatever, because he's a wizard, and these people have this weird cult of personality thing that has happened due to all these generations of dictators. I mean, imagine like North Korea being like one section of this world, and the family just keeps using magic to subjugate all these people and brainwash them. And now there's like a decent dude, I guess, that is going to be the new dictator. So his grandpa is kind of telling everyone what to do. Sorry, this is going to be full of digressions because this whole series is insane. Anyways, the second story has to do with Richard and Kaylin going back to the Mud People, who I forgot to talk about in the first book. That was the first time that Richard and Kaylin almost got spicy. Part of this series is essentially giving you sexual tension blue balls for 4 books. 5. I remember when my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time in high school, was reading them, and she's like, when is the action going to happen? This is getting stupid. And I was like, at this book. And then she was just like, I'm out. So she gave up on reading them. That was a smart move. Back to what I was saying. They're back with the Mud People. They're going to get married so they can seal the deal. But something comes up, and Richard's been having bad headaches, and then out of nowhere, this sister shows up who is, speaking of derivative, this is a Aes Sedai, except in this world. And she tells Richard, hey, you've got magical powers. It's 3 sisters. She's like, hey, you've got magical powers, and you have to come with us because you need to be trained as a wizard so the magic doesn't kill you. That's where your headaches are coming from. And he's like, nah, I'm fine. I can deal with pain. So one of the other sisters stabs this sister in the back and kills her. And it's like, wait, what? And then the last 2 say, hey, you have to come with us or this is going to happen again. And so the next day they come back and they're like, hey, you coming with us or not? And he's like, no. So then a sister stabs the other sister in the back, kills her. Then I guess he decides to go. This is where this book is interesting, but also not. Like, one of the things about this series is it could be really good, except Terry Goodkind was an egomaniac and these always just go weird places. I'm going to try to get through the rest of this book because I'm only on book 2 and this has been 10 minutes or however long it's been. So Richard goes off to the old world. He has to go through like this magical boundary that separates the old world from the new world. And so he's going off into basically Asia. Here it is. I just realized it. So yeah, the old world, you have to go through this barrier, and then there's this major point where the old world and the new world used to mingle, and that is Constantinople, but whatever it's called in here, I can't remember. But it's the big city where the wizards get trained, and it's in a palace where there's like time dilation or something weird, so wizards can be trained, and time goes by really fast outside. And for some reason, there's a bunch of brothels right outside of the wizard school because eugenics. They want more wizards, so they've got a lot of people out there kind of making it with the young wizards. Anyways, this is when Richard finds out there's an evil emperor that rules all of the old world, and for some reason, the dude likes to say darlin a lot. It's really strange because he's basically like Genghis Khan, except like yoked and well-dressed, and says darlin. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Anyways, during this, Kaylin goes back to Aidendril, which is like the capital of the Midlands or whatever. And on her way there, she finds out that Abyssinia, which is one of the big cities, which is where her father used to rule. He was a king. He got converted by her mother, who was a confessor, and then he was like a love slave, and then they had Kaylin, and so he couldn't be king anymore, and there's some weird bad blood between them. Anyways, she's shocked to realize that everyone is dead. There's been this betrayal, and there's this group of troops that had sacked the city and killed everyone. Everyone's dead. There was a lot of really messed up SA. I'm not going to say what that is, but you know, it's the thing that people put in their books when they're trying to be edgy, and it always involves exploiting women in like the worst way possible. So Kaylin catches up with a group of soldiers that were from this city, and those soldiers are all like teenagers. Like, they don't have any training. They were like the cadet corps from like junior high and high school. And she figures out they don't know what they're doing, but they want revenge. And she wants revenge. She wants to stop these people. So she starts guerrilla boot camp because she's essentially Napoleon, because her father was a great military commander. And somehow in his like half crazed ramblings, because he had the whole confessor thing done to him and was in love with Kaylin's mother. Her mother was basically like, make her a conqueror or a military tactician or something. And so she knows knows everything about the military because that's how it always works in these books. Anyway, she ends up teaching them guerrilla warfare, and then for some reason fights naked with body paint on a horse, and they like kill a bunch of horses and really F with these bad guys, and they end up winning, and it's like this drawn out guerrilla campaign that's like brutal, and most of that was pretty cool. Like, it's kind of stupid that she just is automatically hyper competent, but that is like the theme of this series. But it is interesting for her to take these young raw recruits and not only show them the brutalities of war, show them how to succeed in spite of these impossible odds. I am a big fan of that, even in these. Anyways, while this is all going on, Richard is being seduced by his like trainer or whatever that's trying to teach him magic, but the seduction's not working because he's in love with Kaylin, all that good stuff. After months at the palace, Richard escapes after some Sisters of the Dark, also known as the Dark Aja or whatever, because these are just copies from the Wheel of Time, except there's this weird scene where there's like sex with a demon monster thing that gives women magical powers. It's really creepy and strange, and I probably shouldn't have read it when I was 13. So yeah, this story ends with Kaylin almost dying when she finally gets to Adendril because the emperor of the old world, his name is Jagang, he somehow manages to get into people's minds and corrupts the commoners in Adendril, and they start some French Revolution type thing, and Zed protects her with magic or whatever, an illusion or some crap, I don't remember exactly. And then Richard uses some Deus Ex Machina powers to seal the weird thing that was the whole impetus for this novel. And then him and Kaylin get to go to some magical dream world where Richard points out that he's basically a wizard and regrows her hair that's been cut off, and then they bang in this dream world. So they sealed the deal, but not in real life. I don't know what to say to that. And then we get the third book, which is Blood of the Fold. And Blood of the Fold is about Richard going to Adendril, and this is when we start getting into some real politics. Some of the major politics are religious zealotry. So basically Jagang, with his ability to get into people's minds and stuff, ends up, I forgot about this. Holy crap, this cover is hideous. I will share each cover as we're talking, but wow. Yep, that one is just something else. I don't even know if there's a dragon in the book. I can't remember now. The whole religious zealotry. These people are getting crazier and crazier, and Richard starts gathering up some people from Tahara, and he's trying to kind of stabilize the region because there's a bigger threat of Jagang and all that stuff that's slowly being figured out. This book is like a nothing. It's kind of stupid. He ends up going and destroying the Palace of Prophets because Jagang was going to live there and use his mind control powers and basically live forever because of the whole time dilation thing. And I forgot that a relative of Richard's on the Rawl side that's like 1,000 years old at this point was trapped in the basement of that palace where wizards get trained because he's a prophet, like he can see the future. And yeah, prophecies are too strong. At one point he tells a prostitute some little secret, and because he knew that it would be like a butterfly effect that would stop some other evil emperor from coming to power. So I don't know. Yeah, this book is just like whatever. So Richard's trying to consolidate power. There's this weird bleed over of cultures from the old world and the new world. No one's really sure how it's happening. Emperor Jagang's favorite sport, I think it's called Jirok or something, and it doesn't matter again until the last book, like literally book 12, and we're on book 3. It barely gets mentioned again, but it's like some weird game that's kind of like Highlight or something. It's not described very well. There's like a really heavy ball used, and so the sport revolves around brute strength, but Richard's like, hey, why don't you use a light ball so the little light kids can play too? And then it becomes like a game of like skill and agility because the smart people use skill and agility and not brute force, or whatever the lesson is for that. So then we move on to book 4 because book 3 really doesn't matter much. Temple of the Winds is more of them consolidating Adendril, but now there's a plague. Emperor Jagang took control of someone and like people almost died. Weird stuff happens. Every book starts with like a banger of an intro because that's how you get people rooted in. I mean it when I say these things are written like action thrillers. Now, Temple of the Winds, there's like a prophecy that Kaylin is going to betray Richard, and you know, they're finally together and they're spending time together, but they're like, nope, not yet. We can't seal the deal. Not yet. There's no like religious reason for us not to be sleeping together, but we're not going to do it yet. You got to put a ring on it or whatever is going on. I don't know. Like Zed is like off because of course having the wizard out of the way makes all of this a lot easier to do. He's hunting down Nathan, the 1,000-year-old ancestor of Richard, who is a prophet, and all that crap. And they're still Sisters of the Dark and everything because they work with the Dark One, but also Emperor Jagang for some reason. We find out that someone shows up that is like related to Richard as like a Rawl. And you know what? Oh, look, he's a serial killer that tortures prostitutes. There's a really graphic scene of that. That wasn't pleasant to read. And then Richard gets into the Temple of the Winds by fulfilling a prophecy where Kaylin betrayed Richard, but the betrayal was she slept with him, but she thought it was someone else, and that made him feel betrayed because she liked it. So that's like disgusting. But anyways, he gets into the temple where the ancestors are, and he gets all his powers. He can craft another sort of truth out of nowhere, blah, blah, blah. All that crap. Really stupid. Well, he wants to leave, and Dark and Rawl shows up, and he's like, well, I'm your ancestor too, so you can't leave unless you take in the plague that you cured when you came in here. So Richard has to leave with the bubonic plague or something, and so he shows up just in time to like harness his last reserve of strength and take out the serial killing bad guy that had the sword of truth because whatever, he was related to Richard, and somehow a guy you've just met that acts nice, give him this sword, whatever. He was about to like torture and kill Kaylin. So he kills her, and then he starts dying of the plague, and then for some reason Richard gets magical powers and heals himself or something. Every single one of these books basically ends with a Deus Ex Machina. Do with that as you will as well. I'm going to try to speed this up, I promise. So Soul of the Fire is the first book in the series that is Objectivism, the fantasy novel. The story revolves around them figuring out magic is like withering away for some reason. There's something called the chimes that are affecting magic. It's absorbing all the magic out of the world. Magical creatures are dying, all this stuff. Oh, I forgot to mention these, but there's these things called like Gar, I think. They're like pig-faced, jacked, hairy demon guys with wings that were once people but were like created by wizards during an ancient wizard war to hunt these other magical assassins. And Richard killed the mother of a baby one and then like kind of raised it and took care of it, and that was one of the Deus Ex Machinas in one of the other books. I forgot about that, but he comes back and he can like almost talk, and he like loves Richard. They're like best friends, and he's like the king of the creatures now. Yeah, I forgot about that. Anyways, in Soul of the Fire, they go to this country. It's Anderith, and there's like these weird Machiavellian things going on. It's all politics. Part of it is this country of Anderith has what is called the bell. There's like a bell or something. You ring the bell and it like kills everyone outside the borders or something. There's like these towers that run all the way around this country, and when you ring the bell, it sends out like a sonic boom or something that kills everyone. I don't know. Well, Jagang wants that. And so Anderith is like, we might surrender to him because, you know, he literally owns Asia and there's no way to beat him. And Richard's like, with whatever we do, hard work, being based or whatever it is, we'll defeat him. And they're like, nah, dude, I ain't seeing it. Anyways, more political machinations. There's like these secrets that are found out. And at the end, when Kaylin is like, oh, I'm so excited, me and Richard are married and I'm pregnant, she gets almost fridged. She gets beat almost to death. Her bones are all broken. Richard is jaded and is like, fine, if y'all don't want to support me to stop this evil emperor because you're too stupid to understand it, then I'm just going to opt out of politics and let the world fall apart because you all deserve it. It's literally the Who is John Galt thing from Atlas Shrugged. He's like, the people don't deserve smart, competent rulers, so I'm just going to leave until they figure it out or learn a lesson or something. And it's like, all right, dude. So he takes her back to the Westlands at the end of this book and is helping her heal. Her bones were all broken. She lost the baby. It's ridiculous. That begins Faith of the Fallen. Well, the first whatever chunk of the book is him helping her get better. Her bones are all broken. She lost a baby. She's had this horrific physical and psychological damage. And as much as this series is like not very good, this is very beautiful. I mean, the love between Richard and Kaylin, and the fact that Richard loves her enough and cares for her enough to actually help her recover is beautiful. Like, he doesn't baby her, but he also isn't like ridiculously stern. This early section of this book is incredibly moving. And then Nikki shows up, and Nikki is one of like Jagang's brainwashed dark sisters, aka Dark Aja, and she is convinced that if Richard lives in her crappy authoritarian country that Jagang rules, that he will understand why that government is so much better than this weird one that Richard wants to implement where people are free, because that's what people need is freedom. And so she creates like this soul bond with Kaylin, and she's like, anything that happens to me happens to her. And so I'm gonna torture myself or end myself, and you'll lose her if you don't come with me. And so he has to go with her, and they venture all across the new world and go into the old world and go into like the capital of Jagang's crappy, basically communist empire. So Richard is working as like this low level nothing. She's trying to show Richard, see, like, this is how real people live. Like, you don't understand. And he's like, this place sucks. And she's like, no, this is life. You just have to figure it out. Like, you'll understand. And so then Richard starts like working overnight and basically becomes this capitalist in this communist country. And then he basically gets put in jail for capitalism, and he has to work on the new palace that's being built by Jagang, because you remember Richard destroyed the one that Jagang wanted to use to live forever. And Nikki had lied and said he's like a he's a sculptor, and Richard's like, I've whittled, and she's like, stone's just wood but made of stone or whatever. And so he's a sculptor now, and then for some reason he gets the opportunity to sculpt the penultimate piece for this palace, but he's keeping it a secret from this weird sorcerer guy who is not a wizard, and yet it never explains the difference between wizards, sorcerers, sorceresses, all that crap. I'm guessing because there is no difference, or Terry Goodkind didn't know. Well, anyways, this book ends with Richard sculpting a statue of a man and a woman who are so beautiful that it causes the government to be overthrown. I mean, it's basically the Fountainhead. I don't know if you've noticed yet, but so much of this is the weird straw mans and all the other baggage that comes with reading Ayn Rand's works. But I will say that if I had to choose between reading Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead again, or the entire Sword of Truth series, I would read the Sword of Truth series. But I digress. Let's move on to the next books. At the end of that book, Kaylin ran Richard through with a sword because he was trying to show her without saying anything that he was him, and she didn't notice and she stabbed him. So that was cool. The next two books, Pillars of Creation and Naked Empire, shouldn't even exist. They're like weird books. So the Pillars of Creation, Richard and Kaylin aren't even the main characters, and it's not good, and it just kind of sets some things up for later. Basically, anyone that's a child of the raw bloodline but doesn't have magic is like a void in the world, and magic doesn't work on them, and that's the dominant gene. So if they have kids, they're immune to magic, and eventually, like, the whole thing is, if enough of those people have kids, magic will cease to work in the world. And so they're cordoned off in like some valley, and they haven't been to the outside world. And then Naked Empire, Richard gets like poisoned because someone wants him to do something, and now he's like, I'll give you the antidote as soon as blah blah blah. So Deus Ex Machina's happen, and Richard figures out his powers. At some point he's dying of poison, but because he's a war wizard and he can run on instinct, he magically knows how to make an antidote to this poison that no one else knows how to make, because his feelings. And then we move on to the trilogy that ends the series, and that is Chainfire, Phantom, and Confessor. Now, it has a very cool premise. The story starts with Richard dying. He has a crossbow bolt in his chest. He has like a sucking chest wound. He had been fighting because they got ambushed, and when he wakes up from a coma, he's like, oh, where's Kaylin? And they're like, who are you talking about? And he's like, what do you mean, who am I talking about? Basically, someone used a chainfire spell or something to make Kaylin cease to exist to everyone but like this one specific person. And that specific person is going to use her to steal the boxes from the first book that Richard didn't tell his dad how to use correctly and almost ended the world. They want to steal those for whatever magical reasons. And so Richard is now like, she's real, and no one believes him, and so now he's trying to find her. The rest of the trilogy ends up being like Richard gets kidnapped and he gets put into a gang, like a slave gang that's playing Jirok, Jigang's favorite sport. And yeah, Jigang says darling a lot again and all this crap. And like Richard has like met him face to face like once, and then they've met through like Jigang's mind control thing. And it's like really weird. All of this is basically more objectivism propaganda. So Richard starts playing Jirok, and of course he's hyper competent at it. He's good, he's strong, like he's awesome. And there is literally a moment in here that I feel like was stolen from Remember the Titans. So they're playing a Jirok game, and it's like the officials aren't ruling in our favor, and they're like letting these guys hurt us, blah, 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 and they're like, we'll hurt them back even harder. And Richard ends up like crushing some guy's face with a headbutt or something. Anyways, this whole thing is like Jigang's obsession with like survival of the fittest, but also runs a communist empire. Oh, I don't remember what book this was in, but at some point the good guys used magic to make glass dust to blind a bunch of people that were drafted into Jigang's army, which doesn't sound like something good people would do. I'm sorry I keep going on tangents. There's a lot in these books. Toward the end, Richard meets face to face with Jigang, but he's like a beard, and so Jigang doesn't recognize him because he's got mud on his face too. And Jigang's best sports team has to fight Richard and his sports team. And this whole time, Richard's like, how am I going to be able to like kill Jigang in this? I've got to like do something, make something happen to make a move on him. And Richard's team wins, which causes the government to be almost overthrown again. There's like a riot, and Richard tries to shoot Jigang with an arrow. And then the books end with Richard using the boxes of Orden and creating two realities. So he has the one they're in and a parallel one that's identical to it, except he sends all the people that don't want to work hard or understand what it's like to be independent to another dimension. Oh, along with the people that are magical voids, so that magic can keep existing. How many of those people were sent there against their will? Did Richard just send hundreds of thousands of people to another dimension because they didn't have work ethic or wanted a different society than him? Richard did one nice thing. So he restored the ability to talk to these servants that worked in the crypt of Darkenrall and his dad, because Darkenrall didn't want them talking in the presence of his dead father. So he cut their tongues out, but they can talk now. So Richard displaced hundreds of thousands of people to another dimension against their will, but also helped people talk again. So that was cool. And then that is basically the end of the story. There are other books that came later, like the next one in the series called The Omen Machine. Almost sounds cool, except for some stupid reason, like Richard and Kaelin get scratched by someone and they get cursed, and then Kaelin, like, I think goes into a coma, and Richard's got to solve it while he's sick. And he ends up finding this machine that is basically a magical artifice that is an AI. So it's like artificial intelligence created by magic, which is pretty cool. Like, I really like the idea of that, but I know that it's probably bungled horribly. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I would never read it again. I looked into it. I was like, what's the narrator like for this? Because I listened to the last book, but the others I read in high school and junior high. And I was like, the narrator's not bad, but do I want to spend 150 hours on this again? And I thought, no, I don't. I do have book 1 and book 2 first editions signed. I got them as a present from my best friend. He told me I could sell them. This series is just weird. If you want to read them, go read them. But, you know, what I told you in this is pretty much all you needed to know about it. I left out all the like gratuitous violence that's in every single book. It's pretty cool. The fight scenes are awesome, but there's also weird Deus Ex Machinas in that. I forgot at one point Richard was fighting a bunch of blade masters. Like they were going to kill him if he didn't fight them and kill them back, even though he had no beef with them. And so basically what happened was the sword like gives you like a justification anger or whatever that makes you fight better, and he just dug deeper into it, and essentially the sword allowed him to pull thousands of years of experience out of it to like fight these sword masters and win, and he killed them all. And then the woman that forced it to happen was like, yeah, one of those was my husband, but it's okay, I still love you for it. And I'm like, what? That was back in book 2. I forgot about that. And so yeah, for some reason he's like the ultimate sword fighter because he has all these memories, which sounds nothing like what happens to Matt in the Wheel of Time. Yeah, this is really derivative. Oh, I gotta talk about this. So there's a book called The Law of Nines that came out after the series ended, and Terry Goodkind said, it is not a Sword of Truth book. It is a thriller that takes place in the real world. It has nothing to do with Sword of Truth series. And he gaslit everyone. I read that thing. He's the main character's last name is Rawl. He's literally a descendant, but in our world, and he inherits some land that allows you to take a portal into Richard's world, and it's like 1,000 years after all the stuff Richard did. And I'm like, dude, why did you lie to us? But also, like, this is the same guy that says that he's like the greatest thing to ever happen, and his fantasy books aren't fantasy, and that his first book, Wizard's First Rule, he was like, well, I knew I was going to be the best, so I found the best agent, and I wrote him a letter, and he said he wanted to see my book, and I sent it to him, and they talked to 3 publishers, and then I got $275,000, which is unparalleled in the fantasy world when it comes to signing book deals. And so, yeah, I'm the best fantasy writer ever, but I don't write fantasy. So that was something. Yeah, I'm definitely rambling at this point. I apologize for that. But you watch my channel so you know where this was going to go. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these or were ever interested in them, or you read them as a teenager because it was like the edgiest thing. There's a lot of weird sex stuff in this too, but I'm not going to get into that. I already did a little. I want to thank you for watching. And with that, I'll see you next time.